Hello everyone, and welcome to the very last session of Tableau Conference, what Tableau Tech Support wishes you knew about your deployment. Before we get started, any one of you guys are first timers to Tableau Conference? Can I get a raise of hands? That's me included as well. Cool. Okay, great. So we've got a good mixture here. And for all of you, thank you for coming. I hope everyone leaves today feeling inspired and excited to go back to your jobs and apply your learnings from within your organization. So firstly, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Sharon Shah, and I am a customer success manager based in London. And I've been at Tableau for just under 1 year, so this is my first Tableau conference as well. And I will be your moderator today for our panel. So before I introduce our panel, I want to set the scene on why we have this session today. This is actually our first Tableau conference session with our tech support team, and this is because in the past at Tableau conferences, we've had a lot of customers come to us to ask about support cases, best practices on working with tech support teams, and questions around common pitfalls in server deployments. So we've decided to take this feedback on board and put together a session dedicated to speaking with our very experienced and knowledgeable team here to share with you insights around what our tech support teams see every day and how they operate and wish out what our customers knew. The topics today in our session we'll cover in this session are deployment, trends and performance, and working with tech support. And we'll also open it up to questions for the audience on each of these topics. And depending on if we've got enough time later in the end, we can open up questions for other topics as well. So feel free to keep questions in mind as we go along. And by the end of the session, we hope that you leave with a better understanding on how to open a support case, work with the team, and how to avoid an unhealthy Tableau deployment. So on that note, I would like to introduce our very first panel speaker here, Greg Kennedy. Greg is a technical account manager at Tableau, so he actually supports some of our largest enterprise deployments across Europe. And while he's been at Tableau since 2015, he has over 25 years experience in tech support. Greg, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I just want to say hello and say I'm Greg Kennedy. As Sharon said, I'm here with Tableau about 4 years. And my role is, I'm based in Dublin, in Ireland, and my role as a technical account manager is to be the trusted advisor between Tableau support and customers. And the goal of the TAM role is really to balance the technical and the business needs of a support issue, to make sure that the business is being looked after, but also that the technical resolution is happening as well. One of the things that you've probably heard quite a bit about over the last few days is Tableau Blueprint, and where the technical account manager role and support in general tend to influence the most is on the top track in terms of monitoring, management, and maintenance, but stability as well. So that's me.
Great, thanks Greg. And next we have Martin Moreau, our Principal Technical Lead for the Technical Support Server team. And Martin speaks English and French. And I actually asked his colleagues in the Dublin office a little bit about Martin before this session, and they sent me this. So Martin, would you mind just explaining a little bit more about your desk situation and if you actually get any work done? Or?
Yeah, it's a situation indeed. So maybe you don't know all of it, or all Tableau server. In his first days, or at least in his past days, there was tab admin to start and stop the server, right? This may take a while to start, right? So instead of losing my time while I was installing and updating or removing Tableau or taking backups, I was actually freeing my mind, thinking of something else, building Legos, which is great to help you thinking. And we had 4 releases of Tableau with tab admin. That's right there. But now the good news is that since we have TSM, I don't have time anymore. So that's the thing.
Cool.
So, yeah. It went a bit out of hand, but that's okay.
Thanks, Martin. And finally, we have Sarika Wise, who is part of the technical support engineer team. Sarika's too modest to say anything, but she is actually one of the most patient people at Tableau. She recently worked with a major German investment bank, and they had a specific issue which we were not able to resolve, and they had a team from their side which they weren't able to resolve either. And it took 6 months, but Serica was the one who helped resolve the issue for the customer and also get their performance, their workbook performance down from 3 minutes, I believe, to 6 seconds, which is pretty impressive. Serica, could you tell us a little bit more about what Tier 2 desktop means as well?
Yeah, definitely. Hello, my name's Serica. I'm part of our tech support team. I work with Tableau Desktop primarily in Tier 2. So essentially we have 2 tiers, and Tier 1 and Tier 2 in tech support. And if Tier 1 can't fix things, then they send them to Tier 2, and Tier 2 have to fix things. So we have no choice in the matter. But essentially I work with Tableau Desktop mainly. I focus on calculations and workbook performance, and yeah.
Great, thank you. So with that, our first topic today is deployments, and our very first question is, what problems are most common or avoidable in Tableau server deployments? And Martin, if you could kick this one along.
Yeah. So there is mostly 2 things that I see when there is a deployment. Is when there is no testing. So there is only one server. This server is production, and business relies on it, and there is no testing. This is extremely painful for you customers, but also for us, because we also walk into, when we troubleshoot something, we also go through testing. And if we don't have we cannot leverage this testing, then we have less room for troubleshooting, which is very difficult for us. So that's more for the reactive way, in a way, reactive support. But in more proactive support is monitoring, when there is no monitoring on the system. So I'm on a WebEx, and the server is down, or something is happening, the queries are slow, things like this. And I ask simple questions. What kind of database do you use? Is there anything else on this machine? Is there any excessive amount of users on this Tableau server? And we don't know. No one knows on the call. So this information, if it's monitored, is very useful for us to diagnose what's going on or find the possible culprit. So the 2 main things that I think of is testing and monitoring.
Thanks, Martin. And I guess a follow-up question to that is, what do you see in a deployment that you know is going to be a problem later on?
This one is interesting because I'm going to say third-party tool. So when there is an antivirus that is not configured to exclude Tableau, then it can lead to, well, insane behavior. I've seen the podcast disappear. I have seen the queries being slowed down. I have seen the files being locked, preventing the processes to start. I've seen crashes. I've seen weird things with third parties. So that's the antivirus. But there is also, maybe some of you are using the ELK stash. So it's Elastic, Logstash, and Kibana. So for monitoring the server, you can use what's called FileBit, which is something to gather the information from the logs. Recently, we had a case where the server was not going up. It was because this tool to monitor the logs itself were locking the files, and because the files were getting locked, Tableau would not start. So I say third-party tools, we need to get really, I don't trust them. Yeah.
Thanks. So switching over to you, Greg, what do you see in a deployment on the flip side that gives you confidence that the deployment is going to be healthy?
Yeah, so one of the tools that we use, that a TAM will use with premium support customers is a very deep technical dive into Tableau server environment called a deployment review. And there's quite a lot of information available to Tableau server performance, both in the repository and in the log files. And what we'll do is we'll actually do this deployment review regularly with customers. And we'll spend quite a bit of time analyzing all of this data. And we'll actually leverage the combined knowledge of the internal support team to make recommendations from this data that we would then work with the customer on a week-by-week basis to actually implement those changes. So this is a kind of an overview of it. As you can see, there's quite a bit of data that we're capturing, and this is actually only one page. There's actually about 16 worksheets in this, each targeted to very specific actions that we want to review. But if we look at the next one, I can give an example of a particular customer who was having serious performance issues, and they couldn't understand what was happening, why it was happening. And as you can see here, over the course of several months, between February and August, the concurrent usage, or the active users every 30 minutes, definitely spiked from 419 to 752, and that was an indication that there was obviously a lot of users being added to the server. And the thing is, as bad as this might look, if we go to just a few months before, it's even worse. So a few months before, they went from 100 and something users up to so there was obviously something happening here that was impacting performance and impacting utilization. And what it boiled down to was that the Tableau team actually didn't realize, the Tableau COE didn't actually realize that all of these users were being added in from different departments in different parts of the company. And so there was a breakdown of communication between the COE and the business itself. But also what we realized was that Active Directory synchronization was actually synchronizing all of these additional users into the system as viewers. So they didn't realize that they had set the default role type incorrectly, and it was actually adding all of this extra strain on it, because they'd originally built for this 100 and something user environment, and they were actually up at 600-700 users. So this would be an example of where we would have the output from this. Obviously, would be to review all of the users, and make a decision as to whether that's the correct environment or not. So. But then looking at the next one, we would look at things like extract delays, and clearly some queries can take a long time to execute, which is fine. But if you want your data to be fresh, obviously it needs to actually begin to execute quickly. So you can see here that this particular customer has delays from the bottom line here, the bottom reference line of 30 minutes, up to 178 minutes before it even begins. So your data is getting more and more stale at this. So this would kind of indicate that we might look at background or configuration, the number of processes, the amount of background or capacity that the customer has, or perhaps even look at what queries are running and what ones can actually be optimized. So that's an example of the deployment review that we use. But at the same time, as Martin mentioned, monitoring is a critical part of Tableau when you're at a very high scale. So there are some tools that a technical account manager will use with customers, monitoring tools such as Tabmon, things like that, just to get a much more detailed picture of what's happening within the server environment. So.
Thanks, Greg. And now we'll just take a question from the audience. Are there any questions? Just raise your hand and we can pass the mic over. No questions? It's been a long day. That's fine. I guess I've got a question for you, Greg, which, oh, I'm sorry. With someone? Oh, thank you.
Hi, I'm Stefan. Quick question. This dashboard, or what I just saw on the screen, this is not within Tableau server, right? This is a workbook that is then specifically to see a follow-up.
Exactly.
Is there something from Tableau available where I can say, okay, I want to have this too, and then I modify it to my needs?
Yep. So the deployment review that we develop here is actually something that we provide to premium support customers. So there's a couple of ways to do it. Number one is to be a premium support customer. Or the second way is to use similar tools, Tabmon being a good example, where you can actually get a lot of detailed information about the performance of Tableau. I think what the value, the third approach would be to use something like if you've seen the shareable data sources that are in the Tableau community, they're specifically designed by the internal administrator for Tableau that we have called Matt Coles, and he has done this specifically to look at server performance. But one of the things that Atam will actually add from that workbook is actually the interpretation of those metrics. You can see, you can get a number. The number can be 50. Is that a good 50 or a bad 50? Those kind of things. So if you wanted to generate this kind of detail yourself, you could through, say, the shareable data sources or through Tabmon. And then if you wanted to have, the additional expertise of a TAM to interpret and work with you on a week-by-week basis. Technical account managers actually have a weekly call with all of our premium customers so that we can ensure, as we saw in the blueprint, stability, monitoring and maintenance. We work actively to do that in a proactive way to avoid any issues. So yeah, that's probably...
Good, thank you.
Yep.
And I think we've got one more question over here.
Hi, two questions. The first one is that are you guys ever going to improve your support portal? Because when you send a support question to the support group, you can't actually go back to some portal and see what you have sent and what the progress is. Because once the email is out, it's like you can't get it back. And the only thing you get back as a response from the support team is confirmation that they have gotten the case. That's my first question. And my second question is that regarding the upgrade, when you do upgrade to a new version, do you recommend installing it from scratch or just upgrading the existing version?
So just on the first one in terms of creating the case, as you say, you can create the case through the what we call the web form. But every customer does have the ability to actually create their own customer portal. It just requires creating a profile on that. It's customer.tableau.com, and within that you can actually manage all of your tickets and all of your cases, and you can add onto it and reprioritize them and various different options. So from a case management perspective, the customer portal is the one that we recommend to use. Martin, do you want to take the one about upgrades?
So for the upgrades, the general recommendation is that you do an upgrade. Things can go wrong. So it all depends how much risk you want to take. Also, if you do not test, then you are actually taking more risk on this. So if you really want to take no risk and a minimum downtime, then just duplicate your cluster. Create a replicate of your current cluster. Instead install the latest version. Restore the backup from one to the other, and then when it's up and running, just with your load balancer, switch to the other. That's one way of doing. You reduce the downtime, but you are also at that moment removing the ability for a certain amount of time. You're removing the ability to user to publish workbook. So it depends the trade-off basically, the risks of safety or yeah. So general recommendation is upgrade, test it, see what happens. If it doesn't work, if it's a test, then you can easily roll back. If it's not a test, then wipe it and reinstall from scratch. Depends what risk you want to take, what downtime you can actually afford, things like this. Does that answer your question?
I can answer that as well. Just wanted to add a little bit to what Martin said. I recently went through an upgrade with a customer exactly asking this question. And so, as Martin says, it was a parallel upgrade. But what we did was we upgraded the parallel infrastructure, restored the production data into it, and then we began testing using Replayer, which is a tool that allows you to replay production interactions against your test environment. And so you're actually doing real life, real world testing and real world interaction testing against your new parallel environment, even though it's not in production yet. And the benefit to it is that you can actually then monitor that environment with something like TabMon or another similar tool, and you can actually see the impact of the new environment just to make sure that everything is working, all of this kind of thing. And then at the point of switchover, you do the fresh restore into the environment with your latest data, and you put your parallel into production. And if anybody wants to see how kind of a further presentation about that, there is actually one that was at Tableau conference in the US last year by one of our colleagues called Eric Hannell, and he talks specifically about what's described as blue-green upgrades, scripted in AWS, and I have to say it's probably one of the best of the presentations I've seen with parallel upgrades.
Thanks. And I think we can take one more question over there.
Yes. My question is, sometimes I find myself in a situation that I have to assess the health of a deployment that I didn't do. And my question to you guys is, do you have a structured approach of these are the things that we check, or in which ways can I reduce the amount of time that it takes me to assess the overall health of something relatively quickly?
Yeah, I suppose I'd probably, if we start kind of wide and then go narrow, I'd look to see if the performance is being impacted for everything. If not, then you can focus on specific workbooks or specific data sources. And when you're working with specific things like that, Performance Monitor is a fantastic tool just to see where things are breaking. If it's in the large scale, tools like Perfmon in Windows is an excellent example, because you can see not just the Tableau, how Tableau is working, but you can see the external environment of Tableau, specifically things like CPU queues, disk queues. When those are starting to spike, maybe infrequently, but then getting worse over time, they're the kind of things that we begin to look at in terms of it's an environmental issue as opposed to the product is actually breaking. So.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, let's move on to trends in performance. So the first question is, what causes poor workbook performance? Sarika, I think this one's for you.
Yeah, definitely. I think workbook performance is tricky because it's something that is difficult for support to identify, and it's also difficult for customers to identify. So in certain cases, it can look like Tableau is just slow. There's no reason, Tableau is just slow. But really, there's a lot of things that can actually cause this. So you can look at filters, you can look at calculations, you can look at dashboard design, but something that comes up a lot for me is actual calculations and complexity of calculations and the number of calculations. So up here, we have two pictures. We have a calculation in Tableau Desktop, which is fairly simple. It's just an LOD. It's nothing special. It's seen it before. Below is the query that we are running on the back end from Tableau Desktop against the database. So this query is about 60 plus A4 pages, just from this one calculation. And it seems crazy, but there actually is a really good reason for this. And it's because this calculation links back to another calculation in Tableau, and another, and another, and another. And what looks like one calculation is actually 10 or 15. It causes something called expression explosion, essentially, which can really affect your performance of workbooks.
So I guess a follow-up question is, do you have any recommendations on how to avoid some of these issues?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because, again, if you discuss this issue with anyone, they'll say, oh my God, no, I need these calculations. They're vital to my workbook, which is the case. But I think you can do two things here. When you're creating the calculations, be a lot more mindful. It's great about Tableau. It's so easy to just do so many different things, and you're creating all these calculations because you can. But if you can think about it while you're creating it and hopefully minimize the explosion of calculations, that would certainly help. But the other option, if you really need all of those calculations, is move as much as you can to the database. So as much of that complexity going into the database, the less Tableau has to calculate, the faster it's going to be.
My next question is for all of you three, which is what trends are you guys seeing change in incoming support cases?
Yeah, so as Tableau itself has developed over the years and become more complex and capabilities have gotten greater, and it's moved from a departmental service to this now global critical platform for a lot of companies, the criticality of the service has changed. So where before there was downtime, that you could live with, now it's it's measured in minutes, and so the criticality of the service has changed. But then also that drives a need for much shorter resolution time on issues. So that's the trend that we see in most cases for Tableau Server. It's become the critical service now. So.
From a more practical point of view, the trends that I currently see, especially with the arrival of TSM, is the backup and restore and upgrades. So it has actually complexified. We have changed completely the way the backup are taken, in a way, or at least the communication between processes. We have created more potential failure point. And we've noticed that maybe in 10 cases that are about upgrade issue or backup issue, 10 of them are actually different. They are all failing on a very different point. So this is something that we've seen. The cases are coming with this kind of issue type, but they are also all very different. And we are aware of this, and we are working actively with dev to, as much as we can, whenever there is an issue, we record what is the issue, and we pass it to them. So, for example, if you had an issue upgrading and you decide, OK, I don't want to upgrade, I want to wipe it and start from scratch and restart the upgrade, then for us it's not really useful because we don't know where it failed. So before proceeding to the wipe and clean install, we prefer to gather the data to know what potentially could have gone wrong, so we could fix it and prevent it in the next release. So this is something that we are actively working on.
Yeah, and then I guess from a desktop side of things, more looking at workbooks, a lot of the cases that support would get are related to workbook questions on calculations not going right or behaving in the way that would be expected. But as we've seen our customer skill set grow, their workbooks are becoming much more complex and their requirements are then by default much more complex also. So it is something that support now has to be aware of and be prepared for, because maybe a couple of years ago we're getting simple questions and issues with some basic calculations. Now the majority of our cases have very complex workbooks which we need to work through, or issues with very complex calculations which take longer and take more knowledge and experience to resolve.
Thank you. I'm going to pause for a second and just ask the audience if there are any questions regarding trends or workbook performances. No? Last chance.
I inherited a workbook that is kind of a mess, and they kind of said, can you just look at this and see how to optimize it? So I'm dealing with this monster, and I'm finding some things, and I can do it, but the challenge I keep facing is it seems like every time I do something and check something, it does a new extract, even if I feel like I haven't changed anything that should generate a new extract. Can you explain how that sort of happens?
If it's something that you're changing in the workbook, I would say it shouldn't be creating a new extract. But what may be happening is every time you change something, change a calculation, Tableau suddenly has to recalculate everything because you've made a change there. Especially if the calculations or something you're changing also affects other calculations. Like I explained before, it's a chain reaction. So you change one thing, it changes 10 things on the back end. What you can do is, you might not have seen it, but there's a little pause button towards the top of the application under the drop-down menus on the left. If you hit that, make your changes, and then let everything reload, that's definitely going to save you some time, because I know sometimes you try to make 3 different changes, but before you want to see anything, Tableau is already trying to work ahead of you and calculate those. So I would say pausing the workbook itself so nothing is recalculated until you're ready would be the easiest way for you to actually work through the workbook without going insane.
Great, thank you. Got one more question?
Again, we are fairly new to Tableau, and we are trying to figure out the performance on the Tableau service. So in terms of the performance, do you have any recommendations? How should we test it? At the moment, we are testing with both extracts and live connections, but we're not sure that how we can test it to the maximum, just to find out how much load the whole service stack can take. Do you have any suggestions on that?
Well, that's more for you. It would be, I would probably use TabJolt for this, to scale this up. Maybe play a bit with it and use replay. Yeah, that would be my guess.
The difficulty will be getting it up to a scale that's actually equivalent to you, that you expect it to be real life use. So as Martin says, TabJolt is great for that, but like all test harnesses, be it TabJolt or HP Loader or anything like that, it suffers from the fact that it's an artificial test. So by using Replayer to replay your production traffic to this data source, that's a better option. Having said that, you need to have something monitoring it to be able to tell if it's working or not. So this is where the recommendation would come to use. I recommend Tabmon because it's obviously specifically for Tableau, but at the same time you could equally use CloudWatch, any of the SolarWinds tools, just to see the impact of this. Plus also monitoring on the data source side, so actually working with your data source team to see, is there an impact on it, or is it negative or positive, and and gathering some data on it.
Okay. Thanks. And our last topic today is working with technical support. So the first question is, what do you wish customers knew about how technical support operates? Sarika, are you able to take this one?
Yeah. So as a brief overview of how tech support in Tableau works, essentially there's, I guess, 3 phases of a case. We have tier 1, we have tier 2, and then we have development. So all cases go through tier 1 initially. They're the guys who will triage the case, they scope everything out, they get as much information as possible, and they'll then try to resolve the case. So for tier 1, we have a resolve rate of about 60%. But the remaining cases that we don't resolve in tier 1 get them passed to tier 2, which is my team. So we have to resolve things, so at that point we would look into it further based on the information the tier 1 engineer has already gathered, and we would resolve the case at that point if we can. If we cannot, or if it looks like it's more an issue in the product, a defect, something like that, we might then engage our development team so that they can look into it further and confirm, yes, this is a defect, no, this is expected behavior, no, this might be an environmental issue, but that's the basic phases of tech support.
And what can customers do to make their tech support experience easier?
So one of the things that Sarika mentioned is actually this diagnostics gathering phase. And one of the things that a lot of technical account managers provide to their customers is just a cheat sheet that says, this is what we would like. And a lot of this is, very common sense information, but sometimes, it doesn't actually arrive. But the goal of this is to avoid the ping pong back and forth between Tableau support and the customer. And as you can see, this cheat sheet will be available to download on from the website, but it's basic things like, if you're not at your desk or you're not planning to be at your desk, give us your mobile number, because then we can actually contact you. But it also comes down to getting log files and the actual time that the issue happens. So as you can imagine, particularly in Tableau server logs, this is a giant haystack and we're looking for a tiny little needle. So, a way to find that needle is to actually know when the issue happened. And then, the best of the lot, and we would praise you if you can do this, is a video of the issue in progress. Or a screenshot, But all of these things, there is relevant reasons why we would ask them. But if you can provide all of these up front, what it allows is for our tier 1 team to work on the case without having to interact, without having to ask questions, because the data is already there. And very frequently, they can actually provide the solution at the first contact. So, yeah.
Thanks, Greg. And I just want to reiterate that all this content will be shared through our Tableau conference videos later on as well next week.